The evening air was cool and peaceful as Staff Sergeant David Thompson walked down Maple Street, carrying 2 grocery bags filled with his weekly shopping. After 3 long deployments overseas, these simple moments felt like luxury. The familiar sound of his boots on the sidewalk reminded him of countless patrols in dangerous territories, but tonight was different. Tonight he was home. David had served his country with honor for 8 years, specializing as a Marine sniper. His steady hands and sharp eyes had protected his fellow soldiers in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. The medals in his dresser drawer told stories of courage, sacrifice, and split-second decisions that saved lives. But right now, all he wanted was to get home to his small apartment and cook dinner. The neighborhood was quiet, with most families inside enjoying their evening routines. Porch lights glowed warmly, and the smell of barbecue drifted from someone's backyard. It was the kind of peaceful American evening that David had dreamed about during those long nights on guard. Duty overseas. As he walked past the row of neat houses, David noticed an elderly woman peeking through her curtains. Mrs. Henderson had lived on this street for 40 years and knew every neighbor by sight. But David was new to the area, having moved in just 2 weeks ago after his latest return from deployment. To her, he was a stranger walking through her safe neighborhood after dark. Mrs. Henderson watched nervously as David passed under a streetlight. She saw a tall, athletic black man in casual clothes carrying bags, and her mind immediately jumped to conclusions. The recent news reports about break-ins in nearby neighborhoods had made her extra cautious. Without thinking twice, she reached for her phone and dialed 911. "There's a suspicious person walking through our neighborhood," she whispered into the phone. "He's carrying bags and looking around at the houses. I think he might be checking which ones to rob." The 911 operator asked for more details, and Mrs. Henderson provided David's description and location. She didn't mention that he was walking normally on the sidewalk or that he hadn't actually done anything wrong. Fear had clouded her judgment, and she was sure she was protecting her community. Meanwhile, David continued his peaceful walk home, completely unaware that police cars were already heading his way. He was thinking about calling his younger brother later and maybe watching a movie. The transition from military life to civilian life wasn't always easy, but these quiet evening walks helped him adjust. The first police car appeared around the corner, with its headlights cutting through the darkness. David barely noticed it at first, assuming it was just a routine patrol. But when the car slowed down and began following him, he felt a familiar tension in his shoulders. His military training kicked in, and he became more aware of his surroundings. Officer Rodriguez was behind the wheel, with his partner Officer Davis riding shotgun. They had received the call about a suspicious person and were checking the area. When they spotted David walking with his grocery bags, they assumed he matched the description from the call. "That's probably our guy," Officer Rodriguez said, pulling the car alongside David. David stopped walking when he heard the car door slam behind him. He turned around slowly, keeping his hands visible, something he had learned during his military service when dealing with checkpoints and security situations. "Evening, sir," Officer Rodriguez called out. "Can we have a word with you?" David's heart started beating faster, but he remained calm. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" "We received a call about someone suspicious in the neighborhood. Mind telling us what you're doing out here?" David gestured to his grocery bags. "Just walking home from the store. I live about 3 blocks down on Oak Street." Officer Davis approached from the other side, his hand resting near his belt. "Do you have any identification on you?" "Yes, sir," David replied, slowly reaching for his wallet. Along with his driver's license, he pulled out his military ID card. "I'm Staff Sergeant David Thompson, United States Marine Corps." The officers examined both IDs under their flashlights. David's military ID showed his rank, service branch, and an official photograph. His driver's license confirmed his local address. Everything appeared legitimate, but Officer Rodriguez seemed skeptical. "This says you're in the military," Officer Rodriguez said, holding up the ID. "What kind of work do you do?" "I'm a sniper, sir. Just returned from my 3rd deployment 2 weeks ago." The word sniper seemed to make both officers tense up. In their minds, this wasn't just any person they were dealing with. This was someone trained to use deadly weapons with precision. Instead of recognizing David's service and sacrifice, they saw him as potentially dangerous. A sniper? Officer Davis repeated. What were you doing overseas? David patiently explained his role in protecting other soldiers and supporting military operations. He mentioned some of the places he had served, always being careful not to share classified information. But the more he talked about his military background, the more suspicious the officers seemed to become. Sir, we're going to need to verify some information, Officer Rodriguez said. For everyone's safety, we're going to ask you to place your hands behind your back. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just walking home with groceries. This is just temporary while we confirm your story, Officer Davis added. Pulling out his handcuffs, David felt a wave of humiliation wash over him. After risking his life for his country, after earning the respect of his fellow Marines through courage and dedication, he was being treated like a criminal on the streets of his own neighborhood. But his military training had taught him to stay calm under pressure and to comply with authority when necessary. Yes, sir, David said quietly, allowing the officers to handcuff him. The cold metal around his wrists felt nothing like the gear he wore during military operations. This wasn't about protection or mission success. This was about being judged by the color of his skin, rather than the content of his character or his service to his country. As they placed him in the back of the patrol car, David's grocery bags sat abandoned on the sidewalk. The milk he had bought would probably spoil, and the fresh vegetables would wilt, but those concerns seemed trivial now. He was more worried about how this situation would unfold and whether his military service would mean anything to these officers. Through the patrol car window, David could see more neighbors starting to peek out of their houses. Flashing. Police lights had attracted attention, and people were curious about what was happening on their quiet street. Some came out onto their porches, whispering to each other and pointing at the police car. David sat in the back seat, his hands cuffed. Behind him, trying to process what was happening. He had survived dangerous missions overseas, had protected his fellow soldiers with his marksmanship skills, and had served his country with distinction. But none of that seemed to matter right now. The officers were taking their time, running his information through various databases and making phone calls. What should have been a simple verification of his identity was turning into a lengthy detention. David could only sit and wait, hoping that his military service record would eventually clear up this misunderstanding. As minutes turned into what felt like hours, David realized that this was going to be a much longer night than he had planned. The peaceful walk home from the grocery store had turned into something he never expected to experience in his own neighborhood. All he could do was stay calm, be respectful, and hope that the truth would eventually set him free. 20 minutes had passed since David was placed in the patrol car, and what started as a simple ID check was turning into something much bigger. Officer Rodriguez was on his radio, speaking in codes that David couldn't fully understand from the back seat. The officer's voice carried a tone of confusion and frustration that made David's stomach tighten with worry. "Dispatch, I'm showing conflicting information on this subject," Officer Rodriguez said into his radio. "The military ID looks legitimate, but I want to run additional verification. Can you patch me through to the base?" David could hardly believe what he was hearing. His military identification card was issued by the Department of Defense with multiple security features. It had his photograph, rank, service number, and official seals. But somehow, these officers were treating it like it might be fake. "Officer, my commanding officer's contact information is on my phone," David called out from the back seat, trying to be helpful. "He can verify everything about my service record." Officer Davis turned around to look at him. "Sir, we're handling this through proper channels. Please remain quiet while we sort this out." The word quiet stung more than David expected. In the military, his voice was respected. When he spoke, people listened because his expertise had saved lives. Fellow Marines trusted his judgment in life-or-death situations. But here, sitting handcuffed in a police car, his words seemed to carry no weight at all. More neighbors had come outside now, drawn by the flashing police lights that painted the quiet street in alternating red and blue. David could see children pressing their faces against windows while parents whispered behind them. Some neighbors had their phones out, and David realized they might be recording or taking pictures. Mrs. Chun from the house across the street walked over to Officer Davis. She had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years and had never seen this much police activity on their peaceful block. "Officer, what's going on?" she asked, glancing nervously at the patrol car. "Is everyone safe?" "Just a routine check, ma'am." "Nothing to worry about," Officer Davis replied. But his tense posture suggested otherwise. Mrs. Chun looked at David through the patrol car window. Even in the dim lighting, she could see that he was a young man, probably in his 20s, wearing clean clothes and sitting calmly despite being handcuffed. Something about the situation didn't feel right to her, but she didn't know what to do about it. Back at the base, the duty officer was getting frustrated with the civilian police call. Sergeant Martinez had been working late, catching up on paperwork, when his phone rang. "This is Sergeant Martinez, duty officer. How can I help you?" "This is Officer Rodriguez with the local police department. We have someone here claiming to be Staff Sergeant David Thompson, Marine sniper. Can you verify his identity and service status?" Sergeant Martinez pulled up David's file on his computer. The information was all there: service record, deployment history, commendations, current status. Everything checked out perfectly. "Yes, Staff Sergeant Thompson is one of our Marines. He's currently on leave after completing his 3rd deployment. Is there some kind of problem?" "We're just verifying his identity. He was reported as suspicious in a residential neighborhood." Sergeant Martinez frowned. David was one of the most reliable and respected Marines in the unit. The idea of him being suspicious seemed ridiculous. "Officer, Staff Sergeant Thompson, is an exemplary Marine with an outstanding service record. He's earned multiple commendations for his service overseas. Is he in some kind of trouble?" "We're still investigating the situation," Officer Rodriguez replied, ending the call without providing more details. Back on the street, David's phone had been buzzing non-stop in the evidence bag where Officer Davis had placed it. His wife, Lisa, was trying to reach him, wondering why he wasn't home yet. His grocery shopping usually took about an hour, but it had been almost 2 hours since he left the house. Lisa Thompson was starting to worry. David was always punctual, especially since returning from deployment. The transition back to civilian life had made him value routine and predictability. When he said he'd be home by 8 o'clock, he meant it. She tried calling him again, but the phone went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me. Just wondering where you are. Call me back when you get this." Meanwhile, at the grocery store where David had shopped earlier, the young cashier named Jake was scrolling through social media during his break. A video had started appearing on his feed. Someone was live streaming a police situation just a few blocks away from the store. Jake recognized the man in the patrol car immediately. It was the polite customer who had thanked him for his service. When he noticed Jake's military family sticker on his name tag, the same man who had patiently waited while Jake struggled with the register and had wished him a good evening on his way out. "That's the Marine guy who was just in here," Jake said to his manager, showing her the phone screen. "He seemed really nice. What could he have possibly done?" The manager looked at the live stream with concern. "Are you sure it's the same person?" "Absolutely. He was buying groceries for the week. Milk, bread, vegetables, just normal stuff. He even helped that elderly lady reach something from a high shelf." As the live stream continued, more people began recognizing David from around the neighborhood. He had been seen at the local coffee shop, always polite and respectful. The mail carrier remembered him as the new resident who always said good morning. The dog walker had noticed him feeding stray cats behind the apartment complex. Officer Rodriguez was getting increasingly frustrated with the verification process. Every database he checked confirmed David's identity and military status, but something was making him reluctant to simply release him and move on. "His story checks out," Officer Davis said quietly to his partner. "The base confirmed his identity, his address matches his license, and we haven't found any warrants or criminal history." "I know, but something feels off," Officer Rodriguez replied. A sniper walking around the neighborhood at night? And look at all these people watching us now. This whole situation has gotten out of hand. The truth was, both officers were feeling the pressure of the growing crowd and social media attention. What should have been a simple stop and identify situation had turned into a public spectacle, and they weren't sure how to gracefully end it. David remained patient in the back seat, drawing on his military training to stay calm under pressure. He had been in much more dangerous situations overseas, but this felt different. This was personal. This was about being judged not for his actions or his character, but for assumptions people made about him at first glance. The radio crackled. Again, Unit 47, what's your status on that verification? Officer Rodriguez picked up the microphone. Still working on it, dispatch. The subject's information is checking out, but we're waiting for additional confirmation. Additional confirmation of what? David thought to himself. His military ID, driver's license, and service record had all been verified. His commanding officer had vouched for him. What more could they possibly need? As if reading his thoughts, Officer Davis turned around again. Sir, we appreciate your patience. We're just being thorough. David nodded respectfully, but inside he was struggling with a mix of emotions. Anger at the injustice of the situation, sadness that his service to his country seemed to mean nothing, and growing concern about how this would end. The live stream viewer count kept climbing as people shared the video across different social media platforms. Comments were pouring in from viewers expressing outrage, support, and confusion about what they were witnessing. In his apartment 3 blocks away, David's dinner was getting cold on the kitchen counter, and his wife was getting more worried by the minute. Neither of them could have imagined that a simple trip to buy groceries would turn into a situation that was about to change their lives forever. The live stream had been running for over an hour now, and what started as a few dozen viewers had exploded into thousands. Tommy, a local teenager who had first started filming, couldn't believe the numbers climbing on his phone screen. His hands were shaking slightly as he held the camera steady, trying to capture everything that was happening. This is crazy, guys, Tommy whispered into his phone. This Marine has been sitting in that police car for over an hour now, and nobody can tell us why. The comments are going wild. The comment section was indeed going wild. People from all over the country were watching and sharing their own experiences. Veterans were especially vocal, with many saying they had faced similar situations. The hashtag Justice for Our Marine was starting to trend on multiple social media platforms. One comment that stood out came from a user named VetMom22. My son served 3 tours in Afghanistan. This could be him sitting in that car. This is heartbreaking. Another viewer wrote, I was at that grocery store earlier today. I saw this man helping an elderly lady with her bags. How is he the suspicious one? The social media attention was spreading beyond just the live stream. Screenshots and video clips were being shared on different platforms. News outlets were starting to pick up the story, and reporters were already heading to the scene. At the nearby Marine base, word was spreading quickly through the evening shift. Corporal Williams was the first to see the video when his girlfriend sent it to him. Isn't this your buddy David? She texted along with a link to the live stream. Corporal Williams watched for a few seconds before jumping up from his bunk. Oh man, that's Thompson. He immediately started calling other Marines from their unit. Within minutes, a group of Marines had gathered around Williams' phone, watching their fellow soldiers sitting handcuffed in a police car. The room fell silent as they processed what they were seeing. This is ridiculous, said Private Johnson, a young Marine who had served alongside David overseas. Thompson saved my life in Afghanistan. He's one of the best guys I know. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, David's team leader, was furious. Get everyone together. We're going down there right now. Should we call the captain first? Asked Corporal Williams. The captain's probably already seen this. Half the base is probably watching by now. They were right. The video had reached the base's social media groups, and Marines were sharing it with a mix of anger and disbelief. David was well respected among his peers, known for his professionalism, skill, And character. Back on Maple Street, the crowd was growing larger. What had started with just a few curious neighbors had turned into a gathering of dozens of people. Local veterans who had seen the video online were driving over to show their support. Robert, a Vietnam veteran who lived 2 neighborhoods over, arrived wearing his old military jacket with his service patches still attached. He walked slowly. With a cane, his age showing, but his determination was clear. "Excuse me, officer," Robert said, approaching Officer Davis. "I'm a veteran myself. Can you tell me what this young man has done wrong?" Officer Davis looked uncomfortable. "Sir, this is an ongoing investigation. I can't discuss the details." "Investigation of what?" Robert pressed. "From what I can see, he was walking home with groceries. Is that illegal now?" More veterans were arriving. Some came alone, others brought their families. They formed a respectful but visible presence around the police cars, many wearing military hats or shirts that showed their service history. An elderly woman named Betty, whose husband had served in World War II, brought folding chairs for the older veterans. "If we're going to be here a while, we might as well be comfortable," she said with determination. The scene was becoming something none of them had expected. It wasn't angry or confrontational, it was somber and dignified. These were people who understood service and sacrifice, and they recognized something wrong was happening to one of their own. Officer Rodriguez was getting increasingly nervous. His radio kept crackling with updates from dispatch, and he could see news vans arriving in the distance. What should have been a simple call was turning into a media circus. "Davis, we need to figure out how to end this," he said quietly to his partner. "The guy's clean. We've verified everything 3 times. His service record is spotless, his ID is legitimate, and he hasn't done anything wrong. Then why are we still here?" It was a question Officer Davis couldn't answer. They both knew they had let the situation go too far, but now they weren't sure how to back down without looking foolish. David could see the crowd growing through the patrol car window. The sight of all these people, strangers who had come to support him, was both humbling and overwhelming. He recognized some of the military clothing and insignia in the crowd. These were his fellow veterans, people who understood what it meant to serve. His wife Lisa had finally gotten worried enough to drive around looking for him. When she turned onto Maple Street and saw the police cars, the crowd, and the news vans, her heart dropped into her stomach. She parked quickly and ran toward the scene, pushing through the crowd until she could see the patrol car. When she spotted David in the back seat, handcuffed, she felt like she might collapse. "That's my husband," she called out to Officer Davis. "Why is he in handcuffs? What did he do?" "Ma'am, please step back. We're handling a situation here." "What situation?" "He went to buy groceries." Lisa's voice was getting louder, and the crowd around her was growing more agitated. An older veteran stepped forward to support Lisa. "Officer, this woman has a right to know why her husband is being detained. We all do." The livestream viewer count had now passed 50,000 people. Comments were pouring in faster than anyone could read them. People were sharing the video with their friends, their family members, their social media followers. News crews from 3 different stations had arrived and were setting up their cameras. This wasn't just a local story anymore. It was becoming a national conversation about how veterans are treated in their own communities. A group of Marines from the base arrived in 2 cars, still wearing their military uniforms from their evening duties. They parked across the street and walked over to join the crowd. Their presence was immediately noticed by everyone present, including the police officers. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, David's team leader, approached Officer Rodriguez with quiet authority. "Excuse me, officer. I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from the base. The man you have in custody is one of my Marines. Can you please explain what's happening here?" Officer Rodriguez felt the weight of everyone's eyes on him. Here was a senior military leader asking a reasonable question in front of dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras. "We received a call about a suspicious person in the neighborhood. We're just verifying his identity." His identity was verified. "Over an hour ago," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez replied calmly. "I spoke with your department myself." Staff Sergeant Thompson is an exemplary Marine with an outstanding service record. Why is he still in handcuffs? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone waited for an answer. The crowd, the news cameras, the viewers watching online, and David himself. Officer Rodriguez realized that he had painted himself into a corner. Every minute that passed made the situation worse, but he still couldn't bring himself to simply admit he had made a mistake and let David go. The tension in the air was thick as everyone waited to see what would happen next. David sat quietly in the patrol car, watching his community rally around him in a way he never could have imagined. The support was overwhelming, but he knew the situation was far from over. The crowd had grown to over 100 people now, and the tension on Maple Street was reaching a breaking point. News reporters were interviewing veterans, neighbors were sharing their thoughts on camera, and the live stream had attracted viewers from around the world. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something to happen, but nobody knew what that would be. Officer Rodriguez was sweating despite the cool evening air. His radio kept buzzing with calls from the supervisor asking for updates on a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. The department's public relations officer was already fielding calls from news stations wanting official statements. "Unit 47, what's your current status?" came the voice through the radio. "We're still on scene, dealing with a large crowd, officer." Rodriguez responded, trying to sound more in control than he felt. "Rodriguez, the chief wants to know why this hasn't been resolved yet. The phones here are ringing off the hook." David could hear pieces of the radio conversation from the back seat. After nearly 2 hours in handcuffs, his shoulders were aching, but he remained calm and dignified. His military training had taught him patience in difficult situations, and he wasn't going to lose his composure now. Lisa was standing with the group of Marines from David's unit, tears streaming down her face. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had his arm around her shoulder, trying to offer comfort while keeping his own anger in check. "This is insane," Lisa whispered. "All he did was go buy milk and bread. How did it turn into this?" "We're going to get him out of there," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez promised her. "This has gone on long enough." Just then, a black SUV with government plates pulled up to the scene, moving slowly through the crowd. The vehicle was clearly official, with tinted windows and military decals that suggested someone important was inside. Tommy, still live streaming, turned his camera toward the SUV. "Guys, some kind of official car just showed up? This looks serious." The crowd noticed the vehicle immediately. Conversation stopped, and everyone watched as the SUV parked directly in front of the patrol cars. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and a Marine in dress uniform stepped out, but it was the passenger door that made everyone's breath catch. Out stepped a woman in her 50s, wearing a Marine dress uniform with 4 stars gleaming on her shoulders. General Patricia Hayes, the highest-ranking African-American woman in the Marine Corps, had arrived. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every Marine in the crowd snapped to attention. Veterans straightened their backs instinctively. Even the civilians could sense that someone very important had just entered the scene. General Hayes had been having dinner at Romano's, an Italian restaurant about 10 minutes away, when her aide showed her the viral video on his phone. She had watched for less than 30 seconds before standing up from her table. "Get the car," she had told her aide simply. Now, General Hayes didn't need to announce herself or make a grand entrance. Her presence spoke for itself. She walked with the confident stride of someone who had commanded respect in boardrooms, battlefields, and the halls of Congress. The 4 stars on her uniform represented decades of service, leadership, and breaking barriers in a male-dominated field. Officer Rodriguez felt his mouth go dry as he watched the general approach. He had never been in the presence of such a high-ranking military officer, and he suddenly felt very small and very exposed. "Good evening, officer," General Hayes said, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "I'm General Hayes, United States Marine Corps. I understand you have one of my Marines in custody." The way she said "my Marines" made it clear that she took personal responsibility for every person under her command. David wasn't just a soldier to her. He was family. Officer Rodriguez struggled to find his voice. "Yes, my single quotes am ... General. We were just verifying some information." For 2 hours? General Hayes asked, raising an eyebrow. Officer, I've been briefed on the situation. Staff Sergeant Thompson is one of our finest Marines. He's a decorated sniper who has served 3 combat deployments with distinction. What exactly are you verifying? The crowd had fallen completely silent. Even the news reporters had stopped talking, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The livestream viewer count had jumped to over 100,000 people, all watching this confrontation unfold in real time. General Hayes walked over to the patrol car where David was sitting. When she saw him through the window, a decorated Marine in handcuffs for the crime of walking home with groceries, her jaw tightened with controlled anger. She tapped gently on the window, and David looked up to see 4 stars looking back at him. His eyes widened in surprise and respect. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," she said through the glass. "I'm General Hayes. Are you all right?" David nodded, too shocked to speak. In all his years of service, he had never imagined that a 4-star general would personally intervene in his situation. General Hayes turned back to Officer Rodriguez, and her demeanor had shifted. The polite professionalism was still there, but now it carried an edge that made everyone around her nervous. "Officer Rodriguez," she said, reading his name tag, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. The man you have in handcuffs has risked his life for this country more times than I can count. He has saved American lives on foreign soil. He has earned medals for valor and distinguished service." She took a step closer to the officer, and her voice dropped to a tone that was somehow both quiet and commanding. He was walking home from the grocery store in his own neighborhood. That is not a crime. That is not suspicious behavior. That is the freedom he fought to protect. Officer Rodriguez felt like he was shrinking under the general's gaze. Around them, the crowd was hanging on every word. The news cameras were rolling, capturing every moment of this extraordinary confrontation. "Now," General Hayes continued, "I'm going to ask you once, and I expect a clear answer. What crime has Staff Sergeant Thompson committed that justifies keeping him in handcuffs for 2 hours?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Officer Rodriguez looked around desperately, at his partner, at the crowd, at the news cameras, but there was nowhere to hide from the truth. Ma single quotes him, ... General. "He hasn't committed any crime," Officer Rodriguez finally admitted. "Then why is he still in handcuffs?" It was a simple question that demanded a simple answer, but Officer Rodriguez couldn't provide one that would make sense to anyone, including himself. General Hayes didn't wait for a response. She turned to Officer Davis, who had been watching the entire exchange with growing discomfort. "Officer Davis, I assume you have the keys to those handcuffs?" "Yes, ma'am," Officer Davis replied quickly. "Then I suggest you use them. Now." The authority in her voice was absolute. This wasn't a request or a suggestion. It was an order from someone who was used to being obeyed without question. Officer Davis looked at his partner, who gave a small nod of defeat. There was no way to continue this charade in front of a 4-star general, a crowd of witnesses, and a national audience watching online. As Officer Davis approached the patrol car with his keys, the crowd began to stir with anticipation. After more than 2 hours of injustice, it looked like David Thompson was finally going to be freed. General Hayes stood with her arms crossed, watching every movement to ensure that her Marine was treated with the respect and dignity he deserved. Her presence had changed everything in a matter of minutes, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something they would never forget. The click of the handcuffs opening seemed to echo through the silent crowd. After 2 hours and 15 minutes of unjust detention, David Thompson was finally free. He rubbed his wrist gently as he stepped out of the patrol car, his legs slightly stiff from sitting in the cramped back seat for so long. The first person he saw clearly was General Hayes, standing just a few feet away with her 4 stars catching the streetlight. David immediately straightened to attention, despite everything he had just been through. "At ease, Staff Sergeant," General Hayes said with a slight smile. "You've been through enough tonight." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Veterans saluted, neighbors clapped, and Lisa ran forward to embrace her husband. The livestream chat was moving so fast that individual comments were impossible to read. But the overwhelming sentiment was celebration and relief. Tommy, still holding his phone and live streaming, was crying as he spoke to his audience. "He's free, everyone. The general did it. Staff Sergeant Thompson is finally free." David hugged his wife tightly, feeling her tears against his shoulder. "I'm okay," he whispered to her. "I'm okay now." General Hayes watched the reunion with satisfaction. But she wasn't finished yet. She turned to Officer Rodriguez, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the pavement. "Officer Rodriguez, I want you to understand something," she said in a voice that was firm but not harsh. "What happened here tonight should never happen to any American, especially not to someone who has served our country with honor. I hope you'll remember this moment and think carefully about how you approach situations like this in the future." Officer Rodriguez nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry this happened." "Don't apologize to me," General Hayes replied. "Apologize to Staff Sergeant Thompson and his wife. They're the ones who suffered because of tonight's decisions." The officer turned to David and Lisa, his face red with embarrassment. "Staff Sergeant, Mrs. Thompson, I sincerely apologize for what happened tonight. You're right, you did nothing wrong, and this should never have happened." David, showing the class and professionalism that had made him respected among his peers, extended his hand to Officer Rodriguez. "I accept your apology, officer. We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them." The handshake was captured by every camera present, and it would later become one of the most shared images from the entire incident. It showed David's character, his ability to show grace even after being wronged. General Hayes then did something that surprised everyone. She walked over to David's abandoned grocery bags, which had been sitting on the sidewalk for over 2 hours. She picked them up and handed them to him. "I believe these belong to you, Staff Sergeant," she said with a warm smile. David looked down at the bags and started to laugh, not from humor, but from the absurdity of it all. "Thank you, General. Though I think the ice cream probably melted by now." The crowd laughed along with him, and the tension that had been building for hours finally began to release. People started talking normally again, sharing their thoughts about what they had just witnessed. General Hayes wasn't ready to leave yet, though. She had something else she wanted to do. She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying easily across the gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for being here tonight. What you've done, standing up for what's right, supporting a fellow American and veteran, this is what makes our country strong. You should all be proud of yourselves." The crowd applauded her words, and several veterans called out, "Thank you, General." "And Semper Fi?" She continued, "Staff Sergeant Thompson represents the very best of our military. He has served our nation with distinction in some of the most dangerous places on earth. Tonight he was judged not by his character or his service, but by assumptions. That's not the America he fought to protect." News reporters were frantically taking notes and recording every word. This wasn't just a local story anymore. It was a national moment about justice, service, and the way we treat our veterans. One reporter approached General Hayes with her microphone. "General, what brought you here tonight?" "When I saw that video, I saw one of my Marines being treated unjustly. That's not acceptable to me. Every Marine is my responsibility, whether they're on a battlefield overseas or walking home from the grocery store in their own neighborhood." Another reporter asked, "What do you think this incident says about the relationship between police and veterans?" General Hayes thought carefully before answering. "I think most police officers respect and appreciate our veterans. Tonight was a failure of judgment, not a reflection of all law enforcement. But it does remind us that we need better training and better communication between our communities and those who serve them." As the news interviews continued, David found himself surrounded by fellow Marines from his unit. They had waited patiently through the entire ordeal, and now they wanted to check on their brother-in-arms. "Thompson, you handled that like a true Marine," said Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, David's team leader. "You stayed calm, you stayed respectful, and you represented us well." Private Johnson, the young Marine whose life David had saved overseas, was emotional. "Man, I can't believe they did that to you. You're a hero." David shook his head. I'm not a hero, Johnson. I'm just a Marine who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But you know what? Look around us. Look at all these people who came out to support someone they didn't even know. They're the real heroes tonight. The crowd was starting to thin out as people began heading home, but many stopped to shake David's hand or thank him for his service. Mrs. Chun, the neighbor who had first questioned what was happening, approached him with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry this happened to you, she said. You seem like such a nice young man. I hope you know that most of us in this neighborhood are good people. I never doubted that, ma'am, David replied. This situation doesn't define your neighborhood or your community. The way everyone came together tonight, that's what defines you. General Hayes prepared to leave, but first she pulled David aside for a private conversation. Staff Sergeant, I want you to know that what happened tonight was wrong, and it should never happen again. But I also want you to know how proud I am of the way you handled yourself. You represented the Corps with honor. Thank you, General. Your being here, it meant everything. David, she said, using his first name for the first time, I'd like to stay in touch. I think you have a bright future ahead of you, and I'd be honored to be part of that journey. As General Hayes walked back to her SUV, the remaining crowd gave her a standing ovation. She had arrived as a stranger and was leaving as a hero, too. Everyone present, the live stream finally ended as Tommy's phone battery died, but not before capturing David and Lisa walking home together, carrying their grocery bags and surrounded by friends and supporters. The simple walk home that had started this entire ordeal was finally completed. Later that night, David and Lisa sat in their living room watching the news coverage of the incident. The story was being covered by national news outlets, and David's name was trending on social media platforms around the world. Are you okay with all this attention? Lisa asked. David thought for a moment. If this helps one other veteran, if it makes one police officer think twice before making assumptions, then yes, it was worth it. The next morning, David would wake up to thousands of messages of support from around the world. The incident had sparked important conversations about justice, service, and the treatment of veterans. But most importantly, it had shown that when good people come together, they can overcome injustice and create positive change. And somewhere in the Pentagon, General Hayes was already working on new training programs to ensure that what happened to Staff Sergeant David Thompson would never happen to another veteran again.